Well, today I'm pretty excited because we're talking to Peter DeLuca, GM of Sentiance, a great partner of ours for quite a few years. Peter, I think you're in Ohio today, is that right?
That's right, Columbus, Ohio.
Very good. So maybe you want to give us a little bit of an intro on yourself and Sentience.
Sure. Well, Sentience is a data science and behavior change company. What we do is we turn motion data into insights about people, about their behavior. We're focused very much on the mobility space, industries and companies within the mobility space. Think auto insurance, think ride hailing, car share companies, things of that nature. Where we essentially are using very low level sensor data from mobile devices, accelerometer, gyroscope, location, we analyze that data to really build profiles of what people are doing in their everyday lives. It could be on the mobility side, how well they're driving, how aggressive they're driving. It could be what forms of transportation they take. Beyond car, are they taking public transportation, train, tram, bus? We go very, very deep into the analytics to understand how people move. But then on the lifestyle side, when people are at venues, what type of venue do they go to? So there's a lot of really rich insights that we derive from people's, think about it as their offline world. What is their offline behavior? How do they move and where do they go? And what can that tell us about them? And how can brands or clients use that data to build products and services around that?
Yeah, I mean, we've done some pretty exciting stuff. I think talking about many folks would be familiar with the idea of understanding how people drive. I think without sharing any secret sauce here, the work that Trōv and Sentience has done has gone far beyond that. You sort of alluded to sort of modes of transport, but it's been a fun journey, I think, for us, kind of um, working in partnership with the customer, with the client, with the person who owns the phone, to really find
Yep.
good ways of using this data in a fair way that they understand and that the value transaction works. So we've done some super exciting things over the years together. Um, one of the reasons I'm excited to talk to you today is obviously we're in a very unique situation. So for anybody watching this back in the future, early May 2020, in the midst of well, maybe we're even getting towards the end of a pandemic. We don't know, but we've been in it for a little while. And being a data centric, a data forward company, and your business is really to understand what's going on. I'm really intrigued to get a sort of a first pass sense from yourself. Like, what are the changes you're seeing? What are the observations that you guys have made over the last couple of weeks? And bearing in mind, for people who don't know, Sentience works globally, right? So it's not just
Yep.
we're obviously both in the Americas at the moment, but European headquartered company. So I'm interested in what Sentience is seeing and understanding.
Yeah, as you can imagine, us focused on the mobility industry and everything we do is about analyzing how people move. It's been pretty dramatic in terms of what we're seeing 6 to 8 weeks ago, especially when countries started lockdown, started shutting down. We saw a dramatic decrease in people's movement. And our clients are obviously seeing that, and many of our clients are being affected by it. We work, as I mentioned, with car share companies, ride-hailing companies, and they rely on people's movement to generate business, generate revenue for their business. So, as a company that supports them, as a technology provider that supports them in understanding how they move, we're affected as well. So 6 to 8 weeks ago, when these lockdowns started, we saw a marked decrease in movement. And it was quite low for several weeks during the lockdowns. As you can imagine, as some of these companies are opening back up, we're seeing more and more movement. The movement is changing a little bit as well. So as you can imagine, public transportation is down. Private car rides are up. Certainly not to the levels where we saw them before, but as we see the increase start, we're seeing a different type of transportation as opposed to having a very diverse set of modes of transportation. We're seeing it, when people are moving, they're jumping in their car and taking public transportation less and less. I think, and it's not me that's just thinking this, but I think coming out of COVID, you will see some differences like that as well for the foreseeable future. How much people would be reluctant to jump back on that city bus or take a subway ride. I'm from New York City. How much are people going to use public transportation, and how quickly will things get back to quote unquote normal?
Yeah, that's interesting. We're seeing something similar in a sense in the early, I would say the 4 to 5 weeks into it, we sort of saw a fairly consistent decline. But we're now beginning to see sort of a bounce back, certainly not, in the public transport side. We're sort of describing as a shift in demand. So the demand is certainly lower, but it's not rock bottom. If I were to guess, it's probably 50 to 60% across all the different modes that we're engaged in, but it's shifting. Right, it's popping up in different places, which is I think it's optimistic, right? I think we're getting to a place where we sort of understand as a society, as community, sort of what the lockdown is meaning and what's appropriate, and so that's good. Maybe it's not as bad as some of the worst predictions were. So I think that's good. As we look forward, the optimistic view says we get out of this and we get back to something akin to what things were before. But it has it's an interesting challenge for us as a society, right? So we have this thing that is spreading around, and data really is key in understanding, and in a sense, Sentiance is really well placed, at least have some opinions on some of this. So I'm gonna drop one on you that is maybe a little bit left field for your business, but I think has some challenges that you guys are familiar with. So this notion of contact tracing, right? So this idea of we need to understand retroactively if Ian and Peter were in the same room, because unfortunately Ian now has COVID, and so Peter would like to know that. And so this idea of contact tracing, using people's data to solve for that particular issue, brings up all manners of different challenges, and there's certain ways to do it right and not right. So you guys have had to answer those questions for lots of different things. So I'm sort of interested, if you're willing to play the game with us a little bit here and talk about contact tracing, and maybe frame it in terms of, as you look at it, as data forward folks, what are kind of the challenges to coming up with a solution for something like this that works for everybody?
Yeah, we have had a number of different companies come to us and see how we might help them. These are companies that through different partnerships or them just wanting to develop an app, they're interested in seeing how we can help. And I think the important thing to think about with contact tracing is ensuring there are very few tools getting the broadest reach. It's unclear how it's all going to work out in the end, but right out of the gate, having a multitude of different companies try to come up with a solution probably isn't the answer. And I think you're already seeing indications like that from Google and Apple forming partnerships where they're essentially saying, we're not even going to allow certain types of functionality within your app to do just that. So they're really trying to establish some sort of kind of formal regulation around who can do what for the express purpose of getting the biggest bang for your buck. If these tools, or a tool, or maybe it's a tool by country, were to launch, making sure that you have the widest reach so it can be as effective as possible. And we're specifically, to this point, staying away from that because we want to make sure that if we were to help, it would have to be done in the right way, in the most effective way, in the most data secure way. And from a data privacy standpoint, that's critical from an end user standpoint. So we would have to make sure that it's the right project for us.
Yeah, so that makes sense. Like in terms of a concentration, you want this ideally a singular large set of data for the thing to work, and then you're beginning to talk to the privacy aspect of it. So this is something that we've navigated together in some of our opportunities, in the sense of I like to describe it as a value transaction needs to work for the consumer, right? They need to say, yeah, I'm willing to share my data because it's going to help me in this way. So any sort of thoughts of what that might look like in this contact tracing world, where obviously people are going to share their data? I mean, how would you begin to frame that? And I think it has, the reasons I'm interested in the question, it has parallels for us in the mobility space as well, right?
Yeah.
As people are moving in different ways, what's appropriate for them to share and not. But I think it's a good sort of thought experiment that could be applied more broadly.
Yeah, I think, first and foremost, to your point, Sentiance is, think of us as an ingredient to an overall solution. If a client or a product doesn't have full transparency and value return to an end user, they're not going to use it, especially when you have things like location permission, motion permission, things of that nature that are required for a lot of these apps to work, always on tracking. So the end user has to see some sort of benefit in order to do that. And then when it comes to contact tracing, what are the ways that they can be assured that their data, their location trail, all the venues that they go to aren't being made readily available to the vendor that's doing it, and then a multitude of potentially other vendors that are working with them. So I think, privacy is extremely important in these cases, and figuring out how to ensure that someone's location is really being used anonymously, and that if someone were to be willing to participate in something like this and share the fact that they had been at a certain venue, it's purely to make sure that the information being used is to just indicate when someone else has been there that may have contracted the virus. So there's a lot to unpack there, and a lot of kind of unanswered questions around that. But I think from an end user standpoint, making sure that they know their data is secure, it's anonymous, there's not, and otherwise they're not going to do it to the numbers that I think are required.
Yeah. Fascinating one. So we'll see how it works out. So I've been asking everyone sort of as a last question, and everybody has been willing to try this, but you can decline, right? So we're into predictions and trying to get a sense of what we think is in the future. And again, your perspective, I think, is kind of interesting, being sort of data centric. So what do you think is in front of us? You pick the horizon, whether it's 3 months or a year or 5 years, but what's going to happen as we look forward, particularly around mobility in the future?
Yeah, I mean, we're starting to see as different countries open in the United States, as different states open up, we're starting to see more movement. We talked a little bit about that. Mm-hmm. I think we'll certainly continue to see a trend with private car usage, potentially seeing new private car sales, whether it's secondhand, whether it's new cars. I think in the short term, you're going to see a lot of reluctance to go on public transportation, especially in very congested urban areas like New York City. Mm-hmm. So I think in the short, medium term, more private car usage. I think from an insurance standpoint, I think you may see a lot of rethinking on how they service their clients. You're already seeing it, obviously, with some of the rebates and refunds being given back by large insurers. But I think that you'll also start seeing a lot of insurance models change, or companies trying to change their model, where, for example, if they were previously highly reliant on an agent broker model, they might start thinking about what are the ways that we can enable them even better with new digital tools. I think if they're not digital at all, I think they'll very quickly realize that they have to become digital and be very hyper in tune to what the consumers' behaviors are and what the consumers will want. I think that's going to be the cost of doing business. And in the future, I think things will eventually get back to somewhat normal. That could be a year or two out. But we'll have to wait and see. I think one of the big things that we're seeing, of course, is interest in figuring out from a last mile delivery standpoint. So we have a lot of conversations going on where a lot of these delivery companies who hadn't necessarily been tracking the behaviors and routines of their drivers are now more and more interested in that because the volume is all going through these drivers. So putting more, I don't want to say regulation, but more formality around how are these people moving? Are they driving safely? What are the things that the company can do to make sure last mile delivery is safety is top of mind in these circumstances?
Yeah. Obviously, we're in agreement with you there. We launched a last mile delivery fast track quote program about 2 weeks ago. So yeah, it might be that last mile is one of the big winners here. So Peter, thanks very much. Appreciate it.
Ian, thanks so much for having me.